Hello and welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief at pharmaphorum. I'm joined today by Rebecca Guntern, Head of Europe at Sandoz. We're going to talk a little bit about the world of generics and the work that Sandoz is doing in that space. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So, give us a little bit of an introduction to folks who maybe don't know Sandoz or don't know the work that you're doing over there.
Yeah, well, listen, Sandoz is a global leading company in the off-patent sector, and we're operating in over 100 markets worldwide, and we serve more than 500 million of patients. So our mission, and I would also say our purpose, is truly to pioneer access to medicines for patients worldwide. I personally joined Sandoz 15 years ago as a head of sales in Switzerland, and now I'm the head of Europe, and in this role responsible for the operation both in generics and biosimilars across the European markets. We are a leading company in Europe, again, when it comes to generics and biosimilars, and we operate in 40 markets. We serve a lot of patients, and with over 1 billion packs sold per year, of course, we impact the life of many Europeans day in and out. And this is also my key responsibility, is really to deliver on the purpose, together with my European leadership team, to define the right portfolio, the right go-to-market strategy, customer engagement models, and really making sure that we serve and we reach more patients across the European markets. Those also driving sustainability and affordability of the healthcare system. And I said this over and over, and this business is hugely depending on people. And that's why I spend also a lot of my time, or a big part of my time, to attract and retain the right talents, and then foster a culture where they can grow, where they can learn, develop, so they can deliver on the purpose we have.
So tell me a little bit about the biosimilars market. What are biosimilars? How are they different from other generics? Hopefully our audience has some familiarity, but it's good to lay a baseline a little bit.
No, sure. And maybe let me start with the similarities, because there are a couple of similarities. Both generics and biosimilars are off-patent products, which means we're launching them once the patent has expired. For both of them, first to market is absolutely key for success. So once the market is opening up, you need to be there on day one. And last but not least, to come back on the purpose, they really serve both hugely our purpose, which is reaching more patients, serving more patients, and really contributing to the sustainability of healthcare system. But if you then go to the differences, and there are a couple of important differences, it starts with the molecule. A generic is a chemically produced substance. Biosimilars is a biological product, which means it is deriving from a living organism, like tissues, like cell lines. And also the size, the complexity of a biosimilars is really different to generics. The risk profile as well. If you develop a biosimilars, you talk easily about 100 million of costs to do this, and 8 to 10 years. While for a generic, the development and research would take you most probably more like 2 years and roughly 2 million. And then if you move on to regulatory, and biosimilars by definition really need to match the reference product when it comes to safety, efficacy, but also quality. So as my dear colleague Pierre Bourdage would say, listen, biosimilars, or building a pipeline in biosimilars, is more like playing golf. Every shot counts. And if you miss one, it may really derail your game. So to give you an example, if you choose the wrong cell line in the beginning of the development program, it may really have a huge impact, and you may end up with a product 8 to 10 years later, which is not cost competitive. So it can really impact the value you can deliver of a biosimilars, and change the way you produce it and the way you commercialize it. On the other side, generics is more like basketball. So you have a lot of shots. Missing one is not really significantly changing the game, and doesn't mean always that you have a huge setback, because normally you would say you're going to launch 10 to 20 generics depending a bit on the year.
So you talked about this. I think you started to already answer this question, but what are some keys to success in the biosimilar space? What are some of the ways you can make sure that you make every shot count, as you said?
Yes, we launched 16 years ago in Germany the first biosimilars. And since then, we have approved in Europe 80 biosimilars. And we have now clinical evidence of over 2 billion of patient treatment days. So it's really a success story. And I would say beyond the growth, of course, it has a huge benefit for healthcare systems because we are driving down costs of treatment and we're driving up access for patients to those treatments. We talk about 18 billion of savings since the introduction of biosimilars. And also this is already a huge success story. But looking beyond numbers, what for me is more even exciting is the patient story. So for example, in Denmark, we have expanded access to TNF-alpha by 15%. So if you would say, what are then the key success factors? I don't think you're going to find one fits all kind of solution because you have different market archetypes, you have different models. So we would rather say you see some principles, and I would also say some best practices across the markets. One of those is, of course, policies and guidelines. So it is important to adapt policies and guidelines to really encourage and accelerate usage of biosimilars. And also education, so that everybody understands what is the benefit of a biosimilars and also the value proposition behind. A good example here is the NHS. They have really clear treatment guidelines and also targets established for the use of biosimilars. A second success could be, of course, incentive schemes and incentive programs to, again, encourage biosimilar usage. The example here is France, where we have a gain-sharing model in place, where part of the savings goes back and can be reinvested either on the hospital level or also on a HCP level. And last but not least, and this is fundamentally important for the future of the biosimilars, is smart and I would say sustainable procurement. What we have seen is that one winner takes it all kind of tenders are not the best solution for biosimilars. Equally, if you just go for pricing, right? Because you have seen there's a huge investment behind the biosimilars. So we need to look that the market is sustainable, which means multi-slot tenders and criteria beyond price are very important. Because the exciting news is, looking back is one thing, but we still have a gap in access, right? So there are markets where we spend on biologics 20 euro per capita, like Poland or Romania, while in some Western European countries, you have 90 euro per capita spent on biologics. So you see, there's still an opportunity to really unleash the potential of biosimilars in the future and really drive equity of access to those very important, and I would say, in many cases, also life-saving treatments.
Now, generics are a large portion of Sandoz's business. Are they all of it? Do you guys also do some independently developed original drugs too?
We do have a couple one, but I would say those are more the niche products. Fundamentally, I think the core business part is truly the off-patent medicines, which is the biosimilar piece. In Europe, it accounts roughly for 30% of the business, of a 5 billion business. Then you have generics, which is another, I would say 60%. And we do also have OTC, which is over-the-counter medicines, which account roughly, I would say, for 10% of the business. But the OTC business, of course, is a kind of originator business. But if you talk about the prescription part, this is to a large proportion, it is off-patent medicines.
So when you're in that space, it changes more than just the development process you were talking about. It also changes sort of the business model, marketing, how you're, the I guess, kind of economies of scales of how you're commercializing those drugs. So talk to me a little bit about that world for you.
Yeah, the generic world, you're to the point, is different from the originator one in many aspects, right? The first one is, I think the role of a generic is not so much building a market, it's driving efficiencies once or after loss of exclusivity. And winning in generics is almost to say you need to win in all the different market archetypes, being it in the tender market, in the pharmacy substitution market, and in the share of voice market, which is the closest one to the originator space. And for us, the way we really promote and commercialize our broad portfolio is very much tailored to these different archetypes. Another difference, I would say, is speed and intensity of competition. We talked about the first-to-market launches, and there it's easily that you're going to find 20 to 30 competitors which are with you in the market. So the fast decision-making is super critical. So in generic, it's all about, I would say, first-to-market, COGS leadership, supply reliability, and then commercial excellence, because you have more volume to lower margins and lower or reduce product life cycles. It's all about first in and last out. And this is the main difference to the originator, where it is more about market access, brand building, brand positioning.
Now, if you don't get there first, how can you differentiate between, your generic and others on the market, and even the original drug that you're, competing with? What are some of the differentiators that do still exist?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, of course, and that's why I said the people are so important, because, of course, the people make a huge difference in the way we successfully launch the product, right? And then, of course, it's important that you have a broad portfolio. So the broader portfolio you have, the more attractive you are for the customers, because they have a kind of one-shop solution with a brand, because we cover all the different therapeutic areas. And that's why for us, this launch part is part of a portfolio building, and this can be a huge difference. And then, of course, the way we support the HCPs in patient program and patient benefit features can really make also a huge difference. The easiness to take a drug, compliance support, all these services beyond the drug or beyond the pill can really make a difference on the success of a launch, and I would say in general in the generic business.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. How has that changed your business and the role that you've had to play in treatment accessibility?
Well, COVID-19 was I would say, really underscored, underlined, highlighted, whatever you want to say, the important role of our industry in public health. Imagine we are 70% of all prescriptions are done with generics. We only account for 30% of the cost, but the large volume are being prescribed on generics. And that's why we have been at the forefront of the response. And I'm really proud to say we kept operating, right? The way we responded was really impressive, because we could avoid major disruption in essential care medicines, but also ICU medication. And I personally believe this was only possible because we had very solid business continuity plans in place and a cross-industry collaboration, which I personally haven't seen before at that level. But of course, COVID gave us a lot of learnings, right, on a personal level, on a business level, and it also showed some weaknesses in the system. And I personally believe one learning is the importance of a reliable supply chain. So this said, it is important that we keep manufacturing in Europe if we want to have a more autonomous Europe when it comes to end-to-end supply chain. And for this to happen, the market needs to stay and remain attractive, which means if you can encourage companies to invest into Europe, we need to make sure that we can also sell the products made in Europe into Europe. Another one, of course, was a lot of focus, and I would say almost a renewed focus on public health and also infectious disease treatment. Like if you think the antibiotics, just building on what I said, we realized the importance to have also a manufacturing capacities in Europe. And Sandoz is a great example. We are the last vertically integrated manufacturer and production sites on antibiotics. And I think it's super important that we keep it here. And Sandoz committed to invest even more during COVID into these antibiotic sites and really bring new technology in and modernize the way we produce there. And last but not least, I think we all experience is the digital, right? The way we interact, the way we work together internally but also how we engage with customer, with all the digital channels being enabled to communicate on different ways, but also the way we interact with patients, because we saw a huge increase in telemedicines and home delivery. So I would say, in essence, a lot of learnings. And I think now we need to make sure that we create a future-proof healthcare system for Europe, so that we can really have access to the medicines also for all the Europeans across the markets.
So when you think about the future of manufacturing as a global corporation, is it important to have sort of, is the lesson more about diversification? You need to have manufacturing hubs in Europe and in the Asia Pac region and in the Americas, or are you really focusing on Europe specifically?
No, I would say it depends a little bit on the company, right? I mean, Sandoz by heritage, and I would say by history, we do have a very strong footprint in Europe, which is, of course, great to have and which we need to keep there. But we're also a global company, which means we have a global supply chain, which is good because it also gives you diversification when it comes to risk. Not having everything at one place might not be the best strategy to build a supply reliability and a system where you can then adapt depending where you have crisis, because we see it now, right? I mean, it's not that in Europe you're never going to see a crisis. So this said, I'm a huge believer that you need to diversify, but most probably for the very critical products, it is a strategic decision, but it is important to have a footprint also in Europe.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is another kind of hot topic in the news, which is drug prices. Certainly here in the U.S., they've really been a lot of coverage about how drug prices are going out of control. But it's not unique to the U.S. all over the world. What's the role that biosimilars and generics play in that space? Is it part of the problem or part of the solution, or a little bit of each?
Well, definitely, I would say definitely not part of the problem, but of course part of the solution, because we're playing a crucial role as the market are opening up for more competition, right? And if you bring more competition, by definition, pricing is going to go down. The second lever you're having, just to enter the market, there are rules, right? For a generic, you need to have a lower prices than the originator. The same is true for the biosimilars. And, we just saw, I would say, an interesting publication from IQVIA on biosimilar competition in Europe and the impact. And no wonder we see a very positive impact on healthcare budgets, right? I mean, they really enable not only to treat more patients, but they fundamentally also contribute to significant savings. We talk about 30% when we just talk about biologic spending since the introduction of biosimilars, and overall a 5% saving impact on the European healthcare budget. But I believe, so on this price part, this is important. On the other side, of course, if we bring savings, those savings should also be reinvested, either to drive access, where this is not the case, or then also to invest into healthcare, better treatment outcomes, and care in general. So that would be, of course, great news for the patients if those savings can be reinvested.
So I suppose what I meant when I suggested, when I sort of half-jokingly said part of the problem was just this notion that part of the reason that drug companies set the prices of their original drugs so high is because they know they have this ticking clock and it's going to come off patent, and then there'll be generics to compete with and they won't be able to make as much money. Do you think that's a thing, or or a contributing factor to drug prices the way they are?
Well, listen, it really depends on the system, because if I think about Europe, and this is different to the US, you do have very clear guidelines when it comes to drug pricing, right? It's not so much the company who defines the price, at least for the off-patent sector, this is absolutely the case, but you have pricing rules, so which you have to comply with, right? Because otherwise you cannot launch the product. And this said, for the off-patent sector, there is not much pricing flexibility, which, by the way, now with the inflation we're seeing in Europe is a challenge, because we cannot adapt pricing to the rising costs and inflation. So I would say, if you talk about the off-patent sector, very, very limited pricing flexibility. And we have also given as Sandoz the commitment during COVID that we're not going to change pricing for all this essential drug. And I think this was also a huge commitment, again, that we want to really serve the patients and make sure that we continuously drive savings for the healthcare system.
Can we circle back to biosimilars specifically? Because I think we've talked a lot about generics in general in this market, but I'm interested in, like, as a subset and as a fundamentally different manufacturing technology. What are the benefits of being in biosimilars? Are they cheaper to produce? Are they what's the real promise there as sort of a newer technology?
Well, there are different, of course, value proposition if you talk about biosimilars. I mean, fundamentally, we're following our purpose. Strategically speaking, we're following our purpose, because if you look at the LOE landscape in the next decade to come, which on a global scale, you talk about 500 billion, which is going to lose exclusivity at originator sales in the next 10 years. But half or even more than half of it are biologics. So fundamentally, if you're an off-patent company, you follow, of course, also the loss of exclusivity landscape. So partially, you want to grow in the future, biosimilars is an important segment to be in. Then secondly, following your purpose, you want to drive access to this biologic, because as I give you the example of Poland, right? I mean, not everybody and not every European citizen has access to biological treatments. And in many cases, those are the treatments in oncology, in inflammatory diseases, so quite life-threatening diseases. And to give access to more patients, exactly to those most important products, is very much on our purpose. So it makes sense from a strategic point, loss of exclusivity. It makes sense from a purpose point. And of course, it is an interesting field because you have less assets, but to a higher value. So it's a bit different game. It's something most probably in between generics and originator to play with. And what we're looking here, of course, is to expand our portfolio with biosimilars.
Yeah, and that's an super interesting point about access, right? That it's not just about entering a market that already exists, but in some cases sort of creating new markets where people weren't able to really access or afford the original drug before it went off patent. So what is the future of biosimilars? What are you excited about coming up?
Well, of course, I mean, looking back, as I said, Sandoz has pioneered the space of biosimilars, and we're now the leading company. But looking ahead, I think what is super exciting, we have more than 15 biosimilars in the pipeline. And it is twofold, right? It's going to bring us growth. It's going to bring us more access for patients. And I'm super proud to be part of this journey at Sandoz. And I can't wait the next phase, unlocking even more benefits and more access for patients in Europe and beyond.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. And yeah, I really appreciate learning so much more about this exciting space.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonah.
That concludes this episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about other installments in the series at pharmaphorum.com/podcast. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, Stitcher, and Podme, where you can find and subscribe by searching for pharmaphorum. And don't forget to visit our website, where you can sign up for daily news and analysis bulletins, and to follow us on Twitter at pharmaphorum. Thanks for listening.